Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that would be very late for you Irish people. That would be midnight, I guess. But for the rest of the people in the States, if you want to join, I can send you the link to that. We've already read, we're about to read, this week we'll be reading Evelyn.
Mm-hmm.
So we've read 3 stories.
Okay. Well, if you'd send the link, I mean, occasionally I have a free Thursday night at that time, but it's also a night that I'm involved in Finnegan's Wake
Right,
and also in Ulysses.
right.
Okay.
Midnight at the Oasis.
So let me briefly mention to anybody who might come across this video that we are going to be reading several stories from the Dubliners, starting at the beginning. And then we will have some discussion about that as well. And I'll put the names of the stories in the description on the YouTube video and a link to where you can read it online if you want to follow along. Okay, with that being said, I think we're ready. Bill, you want to do that little spiel you just gave about it being divided up into childhood, etc.?
The convention is that, and Joyce may have said it somewhere that I can't remember. If you know where, let us know. But that the book is structured in such a way that it begins with childhood. The first 3 stories are about childhood, and it moves into adolescence, and then into young adulthood, and then adulthood, and then maturity. Roughly every 3 stories.
Answer off.
I think that fits very well. The other idea that is commonly put forward is that the book, most of Joyce's writings, including Ulysses and Dubliners and Portrait, have to do with paralysis. The paralysis of the society, the paralysis of the individuals within that society. A certain helplessness, a certain inability to move forward, a certain inability to, to affect anything. And I think we will see that pretty clearly in most of the stories we're going to be reading. So that's something that may prompt or promote some good discussion, I would think.
Okay.
Another generalized statement that I'm aware of that was made is also that the stories were a way of showing the reasons that Joyce left Ireland.
And that main reason being the paralysis of the society, the backwardness and the static, probably the control of the state, of the British Empire and the Catholic Church on the social life and just the general conditions of people at that time.
Okay. I think that's a good intro there. And on we'll go. So starting with the sisters, the first story in the Dubliners. There was no hope for him this time. It was the 3rd stroke. Night after night I had passed the house. It was vacation time. And I studied the lighted square of window. And night after night I found it lighted in the same way, faintly and evenly. If he was dead, I thought, I would see the reflection of candles on the darkened blind, for I knew that 2 candles must be set at the head of the corpse. He often said to me, I'm not long for this world, and I had thought his words idle. Now I knew they were true. Every night as I gazed up at the window, I said softly to myself the word paralysis. It always sounded strangely in my ears like the word gnomon in the Euclid and the word simony in the Catechism. But now it sounded to me like the name of some maleficent and sinful being. It filled me with fear, and yet I longed to be near to it and to look upon its deadly work. Old Cotter was sitting at the fire smoking when I came downstairs for supper. While my aunt was ladling out my stirabout, he said, as if returning to some former remark of his, "No, I wouldn't say he was exactly, but there was something queer. There was something uncanny about him. I'll tell you my opinion." He began to puff at his pipe, no doubt arranging his opinion in his mind. Tiresome old fool. When we knew him first, he used to be rather interesting, talking of faints and worms, but I soon grew tired of him and his endless stories about the distillery. Joan.
I have my own theory about it, he said. I think it was one of those peculiar cases, but it's hard to say. He began to puff again at his pipe without giving us his theory. My uncle saw me staring and said to me, "Well, so your friend is gone. You'll be sorry to hear." "Who?" said I. "Father Flynn." "Is he dead?" "Mr. Cotter has just told us. He was passing by the house." I knew that I was under observation, so I continued eating as if the news had not interested me. My uncle explained to old Cotter. The youngster and he were great friends. The old chap taught him a great deal, mind you, and they say he had a great wish for him. "God have mercy on his soul, said my aunt piously. Next, please.
Old Cotter looked at me for a while. I felt that his little beady black eyes were examining me, but I would not satisfy him by looking up from my plate. He returned to his pipe and finally spat rudely into the grate. "I wouldn't like children of mine," he said, "to have too much to say to a man like that." "How do you mean, Mr. Cotter?" asked my aunt. "What I mean is," said old Cotter, "it's bad for children. My idea is that a young lad run about and play with young lads of his own age and not be... Am I right, Jack?" "That's my principle too," said my uncle. Let him learn to box his own corner. That's what I'm always saying to the Rosicrucian there. Take exercise. Why? When I was a nipper, every morning of my life, I had a cold bath, winter and summer. And that's what stands to me now. Education is all very fine and large. Mr. Cotter might take a pick of that leg of mutton, he added to my aunt. "No, no, not for me," said old Mr. Cotter. My aunt brought the dish from the safe and put it on the table. "But why do you think it's not good for children, Mr. Cotter?" she asked. "It's bad for children," said old Mr. Cotter, "because their minds are so impressionable. When children see things like that, it has an effect. I crammed on my mouth with stirabout for fear I might give utterance to my anger. Tiresome old red-nosed imbecile." Next.
It was late when I fell asleep. Though I was angry with old Cotter for alluding to me as a child, I puzzled my head to extract meaning from his unfinished sentences. In the dark of my room, I imagined that I saw again the heavy grey face of the paralytic. I drew the blankets over my head and tried to think of Christmas, but the grey face still followed me. It murmured, and I understood that it desired to confess something. I felt my soul receding into some pleasant and vicious region, and there again I found it waiting for me. It began to confess to me in a murmuring voice, and I wondered why it smiled continually and why the lips were so moist with spittle. But then I remembered that it had died of paralysis, and I felt that too was smiling feebly, as if to absolve the simoniac of his sin. The next morning after breakfast, I went down to look at the little house in Great Britain Street. It was an unassuming shop, registered under the vague name of drapery. The drapery consisted mainly of children's booties and umbrellas, and on ordinary days a notice used to hang in the window saying, "Umbrellas recovered." No notice was visible now, for the shutters were up. The crepe bouquet was tied to the door knocker with ribbon. Two poor women and a telegram boy were reading the card pinned on the crepe. I also approached and read. Next, please.
July the 1st, 1895, the Reverend James Flynn, formerly of St. Catherine's Church, Meath Street, aged 65 years, R.I.P. The reading of the card persuaded me that he was dead, and I was disturbed to find myself at check. Had he not been dead, I would have gone into the little dark room behind the shop to find him sitting in his armchair by the fire, nearly smothered in his great coat. Perhaps my aunt would have given me a packet of high toast for him, and this present would have roused him from his stupefied doze. It was always I who emptied the packet into his black snuff box, for his hands trembled too much to allow him to do this without spilling half the snuff about the floor. Even as he raised his large trembling hand to his nose, little clouds of smoke dribbled through his fingers over the front of his coat. It may have been these constant showers of snuff which gave his ancient priestly garments their green, faded look, for the red handkerchief, blackened, as it always was, with snuff stains of a week, with which he tried to brush away the fallen grains, was quite inefficacious. I wished to go and look at him, but I had not the courage to knock. Katrina.
Walked away slowly along the sunny side of the street, reading all the theatrical advertisements in the shop windows as I went. I found it strange that neither I nor the day seemed in a mourning mood, and I felt even annoyed at discovering in myself a sensation of freedom, as if I had been freed from something by his death. I wondered at this, for as my uncle had said the night before, he had taught me a great deal. He had studied in the Irish College in Rome, and he had taught me to pronounce Latin properly. He had told me stories about the catacombs and about Napoleon Bonaparte, and he had explained to me the meaning of the different ceremonies of the Mass and of the different vestments worn by the priests. Sometime he had amused himself by putting difficult questions to me, asking me what one should do in certain circumstances, or whether such and such sins were mortal or venial, or only imperfections. His questions showed me how complex and mysterious were certain institutions of the Church, which I had always regarded as the simplest acts. The duties of the priest toward the Eucharist and towards the secrecy of the confessional seemed so grave to me that I wondered how anybody had ever found in himself the courage to undertake them, and I was not surprised when he told me that the fathers of the Church had written books as thick as the post office directory and as closely printed as the law notices in the newspapers, elucidating all the intricate questions. Next, please.
Often when I thought of this, I could make no answer, or only a very foolish and halting one, upon which he used to smile and nod his head twice or thrice. Sometimes he used to put me through the responses of the Mass, which he had made me learn by heart, and as I pattered, he used to smile pensively and nod his head, now and then pushing huge pinches of snuff up each nostril alternately. When he smiled, he used to uncover his big discolored teeth and let his tongue lie upon his lower lip, a habit which had made me feel uneasy in the beginning of our acquaintance before I knew him well. As I walked along in the sun, I remembered old Cotter's words and tried to remember what had happened afterwards in the dream. I remembered that I had noticed long velvet curtains and a swinging lamp of antique fashion. I felt that I had been very far away, in some land where the customs were strange. In Persia, I thought, but I could not remember the end of the dream. In the evening, my aunt took me with her to visit the house in the morning. It was after sunset, but the window panes of the houses that looked to the west reflected the tawny gold of a great bank of clouds. Nanny received us in the hall, and as it would have been unseemly to have shouted at her, my aunt shook hands with her for all. The old woman pointed upwards interrogatively, and on my aunt's nodding, proceeded to toil up the narrow staircase before us, her bowed head being scarcely above the level of the banister rail. At the first landing, she stopped and beckoned us forward encouragingly towards the open door of the dead room. My aunt went in, and the old woman, seeing that I hesitated to enter, began to beckon to me again repeatedly with her hand. Next, please.
I
I
went
went
in.
in on tip.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's you.
Oh no, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, it is you, Anne.
Okay, thank you. I went in on tiptoe. The room through the lace end of the blind was suffused with dusky golden light amid which the candles looked like pale, thin flames. He had been coffined. Nanny gave the lead, and we three knelt down at the foot of the bed. I pretended to pray, but I could not gather my thoughts because the old woman's mutterings distracted me. I noticed how clumsily her skirt was hooked at the back, and how the heels of her cloth boots were trodden down all to one side. The fancy came to me that the old priest was smiling as he lay there in his coffin. But no. When we rose and went up to the head of the bed, I saw that he was not smiling. There he lay, solemn and copious, vested as for the altar, his large hands loosely retaining a chalice. His face was very truculent, grey and massive, with black cavernous nostrils encircled by a scanty white fur. There was a heavy odour in the room, the flowers. Okay, next please.
We blessed ourselves and came away. In the little room downstairs, we found Eliza seated in his armchair in state. I groped my way towards my usual chair in the corner while Nanny went to the sideboard and brought out a decanter of sherry and some wine glasses. She set these on the table and invited us to take a little glass of wine. Then, at her sister's bidding, she poured out the sherry into the glasses and passed them to us. She pressed me to take some cream crackers also, but I declined because I thought I would make too much noise eating them. She seemed to be somewhat disappointed at my refusal and went over quietly to the sofa where she sat down behind her sister. No one spoke. We all gazed at the empty fireplace. My aunt waited until Eliza sighed and then said, "Ah, well, he's gone to a better world." Eliza sighed again and bowed her head in assent. My aunt fingered the stem of her wineglass before sipping a little. Did he peacefully?" she asked. "Oh, quite peacefully, ma'am," said Eliza. "You couldn't tell when the breath went out of him. He had a beautiful death, God be praised." "And everything?" "Father O'Rourke was in with him at Tuesday and anointed him and prepared him and all. He knew then. He was quite resigned." "He looks quite resigned," said my aunt. "That's what the woman we had in to wash him said. She said he just looked as if he was asleep. He looked that peaceful and resigned. No one would think he'd make such a beautiful corpse." "Yes, indeed," said my aunt. She sipped a little more from her glass and said, "Well, Miss Flynn, at any rate, it must be a great comfort for you to know that you did all you could for him. You were both very kind to him, I must say." Eliza smoothed her dress over her knees. Ah, poor James, she said. God knows we done all we could, as poor as we are. We wouldn't see him want anything while he was in it. Next, please.
Nanny had leaned her head against the soft pillow and seemed about to fall asleep. There's poor Nanny, said Eliza, looking at her. She's wore out. All the work we did, she and me, getting in the woman to wash him and laying him out, and then the coffin, and then arranging about the mass in the chapel. Only for Father O'Rourke, I don't know what we'd have done at all. It was him brought us all them flowers and them 2 candlesticks out of the chapel, and wrote out the notice for the Freeman's General, and took charge of all the papers for the cemetery and poor James's insurance. Wasn't that good of him, said my aunt. Eliza closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. There's no friends like the old friends, she said. When all is said and done, no friends that a body can trust. Indeed, that's true, said my aunt. And I'm sure now that he's gone to his eternal reward, he won't forget you and all your kindness to him. Ah, poor James, said Eliza. He was no great trouble to us. You wouldn't hear him in the house any more than now. Still, I know he's gone and all to that. It's when it's all over that you'll miss him, said my aunt. I know that, said Eliza. I won't be bringing him in his cup of beef tea any more. Nor you, ma'am, sending him his stuff. Ah, poor James. She stopped as if she were communing with the past, and then said shrewdly, Mind you, I noticed there was something queer coming over him latterly. Whenever I'd bring in his soup to him, there I'd find him with his breviary fallen to the floor, lying back in the chair, and his mouth open. Next.
She laid a finger against her nose and frowned. Then she continued. But still and all, he kept on saying that before the summer was over, he'd go out for a drive one fine day, just to see the old house again, where we were all born down in Irishtown, and take me and Annie with them. If we could only get one of them new-fangled carriages that makes no noise that Father O'Rourke told him about, them with the rheumatic wheels, for the day, cheap, he said, Johnny rushes over the way there and drive out the 3 of us together of a Sunday evening. He had his mind set on that, poor James. The Lord have mercy on his soul, said my aunt. Eliza took out her handkerchief and wiped her eyes with it. Then she put it back again in her pocket and gazed into the empty grate for some time without speaking. He was too scrupulous always, she said. The duties of the priesthood was too much for him, and then his life was, you might say, crossed. Yes, said my aunt. He was a disappointed man. You could see that. A silence took possession of the little room, and under cover of it I approached the table and tasted my sherry, and then returned quietly to my chair in the corner. Eliza seemed to have fallen into a deep reverie. We waited respectfully for her to break the silence, and after a long pause she said slowly, It was that chalice he broke. That was the beginning of it. Of course, they say it was all right, that it contained nothing. But still, they say it was the boy's fault. But poor James was so nervous, God be merciful to him. And that was it, said my aunt. I heard something. Eliza nodded. Next, please.
That affected his mind, she said. After that, he began to mope by himself, talking to no one, and wandering about by himself. So one night he was one night he was wanted for to go on a call, and they couldn't find him anywhere. They looked high up and low down, and still they couldn't see a sight of him anywhere. So then the clerk suggested to try the chapel. So then they got the keys and opened the chapel, and the clerk and Father O'Rourke and another priest that was there brought in a light to look for him. And what do you think? But there he was, sitting up by himself in the dark in his confession box, wide awake, laughing like softly to himself. She stopped suddenly as if to listen. I too listened, but there was no sound in the house, and I knew that the old priest was lying still in his coffin as we had seen him, solemn and truculent in death, an idle chalice on his breast. Eliza resumed. wide-eyed and laughing like to himself. So then, of course, when they saw that, that made them think that there was something gone wrong with him. Mhm.
That's,
Nice to see you, Susan.
Oh, hi, everybody. Happy New Year to you. Oh, it's
Happy
nice
New
to
Year
be
to you.
home and be at in the right place in the right time zone to be to be talking to you.
Good, good.
That's
Oh,
good.
hello, Bill. I'll have to get back to Cleveland.
Yeah, I hope you do soon.
Oh, I will.
I missed you, Susan, but I had some of your bread.
Oh, you did. Oh,
Yeah,
good. Oh,
Jane,
good.
Jane saved it. That was so nice of her to do that. So nice of you to bring it.
Oh, sure, not at all.
Are you going to come again?
Oh, definitely,
Yeah,
well,
wonderful.
absolutely. Yeah. Any news on Nighttown? Is that going to open soon?
It's-
Reopened.
It's
It has?
opened. It has
Ah.
opened. They're trying. It's not quite the same as it was. I guess nothing ever is the same as it was. And they should be opening for lunch sometime in the near future. Right now, they're only open for dinner starting at 4 in the evening.
Hmm.
But they expect to open for lunch and brunch in a month or two.
Very good. Well, I have my roster for February, so it's kind of quiet at the moment, and
Mhm.
I'm not getting as many transatlantic flights. But maybe in March I might be able to.
Oh, that'd be good. That'd be great.
That'd be great.
Can I just ask you how PJ is?
Yeah, I didn't get an update today actually. So I saw him myself on Thursday, and yeah, he was pretty shocked. We did all get a scare, but he's doing really well.
Good.
And so I have to find out today, what the team have said. Yeah, because obviously nothing kind of happens in the hospital over the weekend, So he did have strep pneumonia. And rather a rare strain of it. So we're not too sure how he picked that up. But as some of you may know, he was at a Joycean wedding with myself and Mags in Mexico. And so he was, that was in Mazatlan. And then, so he would have taken a good few flights, to get there. And so whether it was that or whether, because it was some sort of, viral kind of thing that he caught, so who knows where he got it, but it's a rare strain. But anyway, everybody's kind of doing their best to to replace him while he's unwell, So yeah, we had a meeting and I was like, oh my gosh, it takes so many of us to cover what PJ does, Yeah. So he's some man for one man, as you all know, but but he's doing well, and he's got a steady stream of visitors, and it'll just take him a little bit of time to recover. But he's been well minded anyway. By obviously in the hospital, he's in St. Vincent's and in St. Luke's ward, and then a lot of us are kind of going in to check on him and that, So yeah, he's good.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Hmm.
When you give him our best when you see him next.
I will, of course.
We're all thinking of him and wishing him well.
Absolutely. I was telling Duncan, I don't know if anybody saw there in the news, but Saturday would have been, obviously, you all know that the anniversary of James Joyce's death, but
Right.
our president unveiled a plaque commemorating Michael Bodkin, so the Michael Fury of the dead. So that was really nice to kind of see. I just literally was at home today and saw it online, so I was posting about it, but it's great to have a Joycean in our Áras, the equivalent of the White House where the president lives. So he's wonderful. He does so much for to highlight Joycean things, really, like he has different people come visit and put on plays, and he has the Bloomsday garden party every year, and went to Edna Bryant's play, and so he's always very supportive of anything to do with James Joyce and his legacy. So yeah, maybe come back to Ireland, or anybody here, you can go over to Galway and go to Rohun Cemetery to see that.
Excellent. May I ask the question concerning the story? How old is the boy?
13. Yeah, I was going to say, so it's not, I mean, it's childhood in a certain sense of the word. I mean, these are not young children in these stories. So if we take the narrative to be Joyce, and I mean, there's some reason to do that. There's not every reason to do that, but Joyce was born in 82, and this takes place in 95, so that he would have been 13. And it seems right for the tone. It's in the first person narrative, so it's the boy himself who's telling the story. And there is that certain, and you can tell he has a certain interest in language. He's kind of precocious. His aunt and uncle are worried about him because he's bookish and he doesn't get out and run around with boys. He'd rather sit and talk about things with this old priest. And there's always been, people make so much about, and I think it has to do with everything that's happened, everything we've learned about, or maybe had suspected, but had learned about the church and abuses of children and the like. But there's sort of always been around this story some notion that there was something wrong about this priest, that he was somehow meddling with this child, and I don't see that at all. I really don't. I don't think there's any indication whatsoever that there was any kind of an improper relationship between this priest and the boy. I think it's just that they're both somewhat intellectual. The priest is very sensitive in the same way that Joyce was very sensitive. I mean, he's so sensitive that he gets so, it seems from the story anyway, that he got so worried about doing things properly that he dropped a chalice. That he's so concerned with the way things need to be done, the prayers and how to, and so when he's talking to the boy, they're talking about pretty highfalutin things, to the point where Uncle Jack calls him a Rosicrucian, refers to them as a Rosicrucian, which is a pretty mystical notion for a 13-year-old kid.
I thought that in the first paragraph, Bill, that it did sound like he was abusing these children, and then it kind of, the rest of the story kind of negates that. So that's very confusing. I think the whole story is very confusing.
But I mean, go ahead.
Well, I'm confused about the narrator talking about the vision that he has as he draws the blankets over his head and tries to think of Christmas. But the gray face still followed me. I understood a desire to confess something. And then we have the last bit of the story is he's sitting in the confessional laughing. I can't make any connections there, but help me.
Yeah. Oh. It is a very confusing story.
Well, it's. I think again, if it's from a precocious, bookish 13-year-old boy, but not very worldly, somewhat innocent and naive, he doesn't understand everything that he sees. Obviously, it's the same. It's the way children learn. They hear things, they don't really know what they mean, so they make up some idea. And he's done that with the word paralysis and paralytic. He doesn't really know exactly what that is. He had a notion about it. And I think it's the same with this. So he has a dream because he's heard all of these stories. He's heard about maybe about the laughing in the confessional or something. He's heard bits and pieces from his from his aunt and uncle, and from old Mr. Cotter. And I think that's something that many Americans and maybe even many Irish wouldn't understand when he says that Cotter, he used to entertain people talking about faints and worms. That's in relation to distillery. Those are the worms of the what do you call it?
Barrels.
The mash?
But what do they use? Still, the pot still.
Yeah.
So, and the faints likewise.
Yeah.
It's all related to distillery.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's interesting. I know Orla will be waiting for some sound advice on this, but the course that we did before Christmas, that Bill, I think, were on it, and Joe, there was a very hot discussion about whether this priest was a paedophile or not. And the audience seemed to be quite divided on it. Now, I'm inclined to side with your opinion on this, Bill. I don't think this is what the story is about. And particularly when we think of the times that it was written in, you know, while people may be aware of certain abuses in the church, it certainly wasn't the thing of strong discussion as we've had it over the last 10 to 20 years, you know.
I can't imagine that had it been understood that way at the time, that it ever would have been published in the Freeman's Journal or wherever. What was it published in the
Irish Homestead?
The Irish Homestead. I mean, they certainly would not have published it if they had any inkling that this was about priests.
See, Bill,
child abuse.
I don't know if Donald would agree with me. It was this sentence on the first page. The old chap taught him a great deal, mind you, and they say he had a great wish for him.
Where is that?
Oh.
Oh, you know what?
The
I
crowd
thought
just went straight up on that and said, "Oh, he's abusing him." You know, he's a great
No.
desire for him, but it doesn't mean that. It means he wanted him to become a priest.
Yeah.
that's what I
Exactly.
figured.
Yeah.
But they didn't stop
I
to
agree
think
with you,
about that. They just all went. You know, they just went straight to 10,000 feet and stayed there. You know, you couldn't talk sense to them, and
For sure. Yeah.
and that was it. You know, but there's also the name James Flynn. Like that's Flynn is Joyce's one of his great grandparents' name, Patrick Flynn.
Mm.
The man in Back Lane who owned the starch mill was Patrick Flynn.
Right.
So this is really a projection. Father James Flynn is a projection of Father James Joyce. You know, of the priest that Joyce might have been. You know, this kind of that's what I learned years ago at university with it. You know, that you could see that being kind of in there. It's very strange that he picked one of his great grandfather's names and then mixed it with his own. I'm just saying that it's either a very strange coincidence, but I think names are so special. And, you know, practically the first name he puts in his first book. You know? So,
I don't make that much out of the name myself. I mean, there were plenty of Father Flynns and Father O'Rourke's, and
yeah, I know. That's why you know in Ulysses, Father O'Flynn appears in the lists of great characters from Ireland. I always think that's Joyce himself. You know, I'm wandering to a different book.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know, I like he lays out paralysis, nomen, and simony. The three themes of all these stories, with the exception of the last one, you know, they to some extent or another deal with those topics, and he lays it out there in the first paragraph. It's kind of strange things. There's also the first edition of it, the Irish Homestead. He published it under the name of Stephen Dedalus.
Yes, he did.
And they misprinted it.
Yeah.
As Stephen, full stop, the letter D, full stop, Dedalus. So if anyone could get a copy of that particular publication, I'm sure it's worth its weight in gold.
That was a different family, Joe. They were the Edeluts of Great Britain Street.
Oh, they're the Eduluses from Mayo, yes.
Probably Huguenots originally because of the
That's
D
it.
apostrophe.
That's it, yeah. Mentioned in Shakespeare too.
Yeah.
We're gonna stop. So it's kind of to me it really sets up the whole little book, very neatly. And then you see the boy is educated. He's using words like paralysis and gnomon and simony, and the sisters are, the Freeman's General is the journal,
Right.
the rheumatic wheels are the pneumatic wheels, and the duties was instead of the duties were, and she's wore out instead of she's worn out. So they have limited English, and yet they're the ones who bring love to Father Flynn, and Father O'Rourke brings respect. Cotter brings abuse. But the girls who look after him and don't send him into a priest's home.
Right.
And one of them says there was nothing in the chalice. It was lucky there was nothing in it, Right. Anyone who ever served mass will know. Have we had this before, Donna? You've heard this from me before. That the point at which the wine gets spilled makes all the difference if it's after the consecration or before.
Absolutely.
So the older boy isn't allowed to touch anything, sort of thing. But the priest does it. And I think
sorry, Joe, I was just going to say, I saw this as a child growing up where a host was dropped at the rails, and suddenly there was consternation and all sorts of ablutions were carried out and so on.
It's a 5-second rule, though. It's not.
No,
I didn't know that.
You're gonna kiss it up to God.
The angels on Pinhead's time. I remember there was wine spilled. Like we used to do 22 masses every morning, and there weren't 22 altar boys, so we all did 3 or 4 masses at once. So it was, and there was wine spilled one day after the consecration, not by a priest. Well, kind of the full voodooism started, the whole praise, like there was all sorts of prayers had to be said and all sorts of things. It was really amazing. So if a host,
it was like an exorcism,
Yeah, but I suppose they have their regulations and the rules, and it all kicks in,
Oh, yeah.
So like I'd say he had some sort of shakes, and after that they said, well, they're not letting him say mass anymore. We'll send him out to the priest's home. And the girls have said, no, we'll look after them. He's our brother. It's kind of
I would, I kind of suspect maybe Parkinson's or something, something like that, some kind of palsy.
Some people say that he might have had syphilis.
Oh, there they go. This is straight. Yeah, this is messing with the kids. We had all this down in the center. It was.
He could have had a.
He's 65 years of age.
He could have had a stroke.
Of course,
They say he had a stroke.
Yeah.
They said it's his 3rd stroke.
Right.
Of course he had.
Oh yeah, it did actually.
Right.
Yeah, and he's he's losing the plot. Sure, I'm nearly like that already. I'm upstairs.
Yeah, I don't think it was the narrator, the boy who broke the chalice.
Oh no.
I think
No. It was the priest.
it was another server or something. Yeah.
No, it was Father Flynn himself who broke it.
And why is he laid out now holding a chalice?
Because he's still. That's the other indication that he hasn't been defrocked. He hasn't, and not that you could. I didn't even think you did that back in those days.
No. He's once a priest, always.
Once a priest, always a priest. So he's being buried in his vestments, holding a chalice, the way he would have been presenting.
Bill, think about it.
Yeah.
Did you ever try getting your hands on a chalice? They're solid gold. in some of them, you know. Like, who got the chalice? The girls nobbled Father O'Rourke for a chalice. Can you see?
Well,
You
we
know?
don't,
Or
we
only
don't,
a
I
man
mean,
with sisters would know this. You see, like you cannot. The priests do not all
Absolutely.
carry with chalices. They say, well, the broken chalice. Could we get that now? And they might even have put a contribution into the box for it, you know. But can you see the like?
well, it may have been, I mean, I think it's the boy who's noticing it, so it may have not even been a chalice. He may have been
Well,
something he looked to him like a chalice.
yeah, good point. But it's certainly a statement by the girls, you know, that they've the way he's going to be buried, he's buried, you know. So you never underestimate sisters, you know. Never and maybe I'm letting my personal life interfere with my view of the story, but I just see them everywhere in this story.
Mm, mm.
Clearly, you have a story yourself, Joe.
Oh, stop it. don't, I'm bad enough, don't encourage me.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't see
Oh, yeah.
any sexual abuse innuendo in here at all.
Oh, good.
And what I do see is I see what to normal people would be a very odd child. He's interested in intellectual things. He's interested in talking to an old, feeble man who's had strokes and to sit and have long conversations with him. You know, and I think that's part of what Cotter's referring to. Oh, he shouldn't be looking at that dark side of life. He should be out there playing with the boys. He's going to get that dark stuff soon enough. But, you know, this is also an introduction to a James Joyce-like person who is right at this age interested in the dark and the weird side. He wants to see it all. And I think he particularly, and this is, I don't know if it's conscious or not, he particularly wants to see it all when it pertains to the religion that he almost joined totally. I think that's a large part of Joyce. He wants to see the backside of religion. The priest, like in the priest, I think part of what was going on was not even necessarily the chalice. It was and this I'm stretching here, it was the disappointment of being a priest. That he thought it was going to lead him directly to heaven and a happy life. And somehow it hasn't worked out, and he's very depressed about it. So that's just my wild guesses.
Can we discuss any thoughts about why he was laughing in the confessional?
Well, it might have been a result of another stroke. It could have been some kind of just some, I don't know, what would you call that? Some kind of mental aberration.
Yeah.
You know,
that happens after strokes, doesn't it? That people.
Yeah. It happens after strokes or after trauma of some kind. I mean, I had an uncle who had fought at Anzio and came back, spent the rest of his life in mental homes, and he was like that. He would cry and then he would just start laughing.
Yeah, yeah. I had a relation who was, you know, older and who when something sad happened would laugh. That, you know, after a stroke, and so when she would say be at a funeral, she'd start laughing at the graveside.
There's a name for that. I can't think of what the name is, but there is a name for that. That when you have a stroke and you lose. You're inappropriate.
Yeah. I think it's that in the box, you know, and he's sitting there. He doesn't realize he's laughing.
Well, he doesn't realize where he is even. I mean, he's just sort of he's out of it, and that was strokes can do all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe he was laughing because he had gotten away with something.
No, no, I don't. No, I don't see that.
Yeah.
But do you ever wonder, you know, the way priests had to hear maybe mundane things, but also terrible things?
Mhm.
And so maybe it could get to them. Because do you ever wonder, you know, there's that one about the two popes in Argentina, a film, and how they were all like super Catholic and they'd go and one side would go and do things to the other, and then they'd go confess to the priests, and the priest could say nothing
Yeah.
except to sort of 10 Hail Marys. And they had to live with all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so even that priest would have heard things because people confessed to them and they can't talk. So it would totally make them, it could potentially make it come out in some other way later on down the road.
Well, what evidence? Who have you ever seen an old priest that you
Plenty
suspect?
of old priests, but
Yeah, I know, I know. I mean, we've all seen a lot of old priests, but I never once suspected, oh, he's heard too many confessions. That's never occurred to me.
all
I've thought, well, he's had a few too many glasses of whiskey or things like that. But never that he's heard too many confessions.
Yeah, but they did, or that they certainly you know, I was educated by a religious community, as you possibly have heard, but they had a mechanism for dealing with confessional situations that they could go up the line.
Right.
To say, I heard this very difficult case. Now, it doesn't have to say it was Miss O'Mara was messing with the milkman, or that, you know, it's just, look, I've met a difficult case where someone has done this and done that. It's usually be stealing money and things like that. And you could go up the line and get to discuss it without giving the data away. You know, or you could discuss the data without giving the key into it.
Yes, you can talk it out.
So clearly there was a problem, like Orla is raising, you know, that there's only so much a man can carry. But it could go up. And then there were the reserved sins that you could say, I'm sorry, I can't do that one. You have to go to a bishop.
Well, murder was one of those.
I can't remember what word.
Yeah.
But one of
you couldn't get absolution for murder?
No, you'd have to go to the bishop to confess that.
There's a review of Ulysses I think it's called the Dublin Review, and it's written by a man, I presume it's a man, who operates under a Latin name, Domini Canis, which, as you all know, means the Hound of the Lord. And he's reviewing Ulysses. He says, not only should this book be on the list of books, forbidden books, it should be reserved sin to forgive someone reading it. So we would all, if the Hound of God had his way, we would all have to go to a bishop, confess that we've read Ulysses.
Yeah, we read Ulysses.
Times, you know.
It obviously it's something that Joyce spent a lot of time thinking about, and because it comes up in Ulysses over and over again, and in Portrait and everywhere, the whole notion of confession and sin and absolution, and it's probably one of the things that convinced Joyce that there was nothing in the church for him. But it was certainly a major area of concern that he.
There's a guy in Dublin has the theory that running through Ulysses is the criticism of the Pius X's encyclical on confession, which brought confession to young people like 7 years of age, whatever it was, 7 or 8. Right. Before that, you had to be about 12. And so you've all these kids going in saying, I ate a sweet, right. But that Joyce was so opposed to this that you get this terrible story of the confession in Portrait, where the kid is that whatever idea is it, where they married women, sort of thing. But running through Ulysses, he claims it's there. He's writing a dissertation on it and hopes that people like us will read it.
And Molly does the same thing when she's talking about the confession. And where am I, child? Where am I, child?
It's one of the funniest lines ever.
Yeah.
Where on your person?
Yeah. And she'd love to have an affair with a priest.
So funny. I get the impression that he may have had a nervous breakdown, priest, because he reminds me of Dancing at Lunasa, where the brother came back and stayed with the sisters and they minded him.
Yeah.
I think there's some, I mean, that's certainly a possibility, but given the fact that we know he's had strokes, I think it's more likely that all of his problems are related to that, to his strokes, including the paralysis that finally gets him. Or if that's what gets, I mean, that's the other thing. I think this kid, 13, he knows some words. He doesn't really know what paralysis is. I'm not sure he even knows what simony is, because he refers to the priest as a simoniac. But why has this priest ever been accused of that? I mean, it doesn't make any sense that the priest would. I mean, that's a heresy. The priest would have been censured for that, certainly, if he was a simoniac and it was known. I mean, so I think that the kid is mixing up his words, and maybe the priest is an insomniac, and the kid and
insomniac.
And so the kid thinks he's a simoniac, because he does. He's just 13-year-old.
Because I don't get the impression that he's like a fire and brimstone type priest. You remember, like Dante, because wasn't she going to the real person? She was going to be a nun in real life, wasn't she? And then she inherited money, and then yeah. So she abandoned. Well, she didn't need to go into the church. Then she was going to be able to get married, and didn't the husband run off with the money? But like obviously, all of that. All the scary aspects like of religion were passed on to the young James Joyce, but I don't get an impression that that's the type of whatever, you know what I'm trying to say, that
I don't get the impression that this priest was ever high enough up to sell anything. I mean, is that not what simony is? Basically, it's the old idea that you can buy your way to heaven, or you can buy your way.
Well,
you get a good price for a 100-year indulgence,
Yeah.
I think more strictly, though, it had to do with selling offices. That if you were a higher up, you might, if somebody bribed you, you might make them Archbishop of Armagh or something.
That's that.
Okay.
But there was in the Joyce Centre, there were a number of sort of barroom canon lawyers emerged, who had strange definitions of simony that only a priest could permit it. You see, there was one. Simony is the purchase or sale. So the person. So if I get 100 years off purgatory by giving them $1 million, I commit the sin as well as the priest.
Right.
And I'm not a priest. So
it's actually adding time to your time in purgatory rather than.
Yeah. So you have to go and pay $2 million to confession to confess the simony or something. But it's kind of it's sort of another world, wasn't it, back in 1904?
I think this young precocious boy is taking full advantage of the fact that he has an educated priest who cannot perform his duties and lives with his two sisters. They're taking care of him, and he is open to talk.
Yeah,
he's willing. explain things to the boy, and that's a very odd situation. Probably all the other people that this boy would be exposed to were either busy being priest and were always bustling about.
Yeah.
And this guy is, he's paralyzed. He's there. He's got time on his hands, and his brain is still working. He still has a lot of knowledge. And here's a 13-year-old boy interested in what he has to say.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
And the priest had a wish for him because he noticed that, he saw that. I mean, what 13-year-old kid's interested in how to pronounce the Latin?
Yeah.
And except maybe someone who's thinking about being a priest, maybe, so yeah.
And you see, the boy has no mother and father.
Right.
So the priest has become the father figure,
mm-hmm.
which is quite a normal thing to happen. Mm-hmm. The kid is living with his aunts and they eat. He's been educated, which would be expensive. So presumably that's some thing that was left out of his father's finances. And they eat very poor stuff. They eat stirabout and mutton,
mm-hmm.
have a slice of mutton, So
right.
There's a sort of a further dimension to it there. And then it becomes a totally normal sort of relationship. There's nothing strange about it.
No, that's right.
The kid Latin. The kid will probably learn to serve mass or something anyway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think
I just lost you guys there for a few minutes. Could I just mention, I was just about to say something about sin. And what prompted it in my mind was what Susan said about the fire and brimstone preachers. For teenage kids, the concept and image of sin was very important and very frightening. And we had this thing in school called a retreat, a religious retreat. And they would bring in the Capuchin priests who would roar and shout from the altars. And you were afraid that you wouldn't make it home before you died, to get confession. So I think for a bright kid, as we have here, that would have impressed him greatly. And I'm not sure that he would have been old enough to be able to deal with it intellectually, I certainly remember having the shite scared out of me for years.
Yeah.
I think it's good training, though, if you survive.
But it does leave a big mark on your soul, Duncan.
Well, I know, but perhaps if you go through the world completely naive, once you begin to realize how these machines, if you will, work, and how they use terror or they use promise of rewards later on, and you begin to get some idea of how this rhetoric is working.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the beginning of a little bit of freedom right there.
Well, that's the old story about Catholic Church. Get them early. Get them early. You get them early when they're really impressionable and they believe everything you tell them. And then you got to have them for life, they say. Get them early and you have them for life.
Yeah.
And I know there are a lot of friends of mine who still go to church every week because they got them early and they're scared to death. Anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
Don't you like the titles? Like if you think about the dead, is that we in chapter 1 we have the sisters with a dead person, and then at the end we have the dead with the two sisters. So they could actually interchange the titles there.
Maybe the weird sisters.
I think it shows the importance that Joyce gave to where the stories came and the sequence of the stories. And I think Bill mentioned at the start about the different phases of life. That some of these stories were published in journals initially. Right. And then I think it was AE that went back to him and said, look, read this particular story and perhaps elaborate on it. But he was always arguing. I mean, it seemed to have taken years to get this published, and a lot of the fault was Joyce's own because he was arguing about the text and making changes, but he also was arguing about where he wanted the story to come in sequence.
Yeah.
I think The Sisters was published in August of was it 1904?
Yeah.
But it was he revised it completely then. It was published for Dubliners.
Yeah.
That was followed by Evelyn and After the Race. So, and those three were published in Ireland, actually, before the end of 1904.
Yeah.
And he wrote most of them kind of like that. But he had a huge correspondence with Grant Richards through 1905 and 1906. Not so much about the sequence of the stories, but about words and phrases and things in the stories. And because the printers wouldn't print the thing because they were liable as well as the publisher for the thing. So Joyce, continued this correspondence with Grant Richards. So he had finished writing the stories in 1907, and they weren't published until 1914.
Yeah.
In fact, the first chapters of Portrait of an Artist were appearing in The Egoist in 1914 in February, before Dubliners was published. So yeah.
The first run of them, to reach the first, he had to go to 300 sales, 300 before he got commission. And he couldn't get above 300. I think he bought the last few himself.
But
He could reach the 300.
Commission, you could say I'm earning commission now. So it's, going back to Susan's point there about the swap the titles, which I love, that you can also say the book begins with a boy looking up at a window and ends with a man looking out through a window.
There we go.
Joyce just keeps jumping up and biting you.
Oh my God,
You stop
yes.
all the time.
Very good.
I just
I think when the manuscript was first circulated and was not published for so long, there were only 12 stories originally.
Yeah.
And then he wrote The Dead last, and he added the last 3 stories to fill it out and to make it what it was. And I think he intentionally has that arc from beginning to end. Finally, I mean, that's I don't think it's accidental that it opens with the sisters and ends with the dead.
That's not accidental.
Yeah, actually, they're the only 2 stories that hold their sequence, the first story and the last story in the whole book.
Yeah.
I just remember.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I just remembered the word for the behavior that often accompanies a stroke. It's called a lability, labile, that it's
labile, the tongue.
Unstable. Yeah. It's unstable.
Yeah.
And he has that vision of the priest with his tongue laying on his lower lip. You
can see it. Yeah.
When he smiles, it's
yeah. Poor man.
Yeah.
So how old was Joyce when he wrote this?
He was 26. No, 22. 22.
It's amazing for a 22-year-old, isn't it?
Wow.
Yeah.
But the time frame is 22 to 25, isn't it? Before it is completed.
Okay. That's still very young. And would support the idea that the young boy that we met in the first story, who is not your normal sort. He is interested in lots of things that other boys his age would not be interested in. And I think this is, related to Joyce's. I think Joyce was the same way. he had this amazing ability to notice things that other people did not notice, and then wanting to explore them further and to kind of take notes, as it were.
Yeah.
So by the time he's 22, he's already quite capable of looking at hidden stuff.
Yeah.
And using the pen name of Stephen Dedalus long before Portrait was written. I mean, this is in 1904 when he's still in Ireland, when it was first published with that pseudonym.
Yeah.
Which I
But if
think
you-
lends a little even bit more to my theory of Ulysses in this respect. But
Good,
anyway,
good.
If you take 13 as the child's age, and you add it to Joyce's date of birth, 1882, you get the 1895, the death of Father James Flynn. Kind of interesting, isn't it?
No, it's
All these
not.
things just could be accidents.
Are we talking some real Father James Flynn here, or are we talking the character?
We're talking the character. The notice in the story that they're reading gives the year of
Okay.
death.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
well, yeah, that's what leads me to think
1895.
that the character is 13. If we're
Yeah.
assuming that Joyce is the,
It's
that
almost he's almost telling us, isn't he?
yeah, he is almost.
I'm just wondering about snuff. I mean, is snuff just like a dried tobacco? Is it like would there be any that the fact that you think that he might have had a stroke, would that be kind of linked to maybe his snuff use or anything? How dangerous was snuff for you?
Snuff is not great for the circulation.
Yeah, not great for the circulation. Like any tobacco, nicotine of any force is a vasoconstrictor, so it's not good for the circulation.
Yeah.
And it may have contributed to the strokes, but it's a hard habit to break, just like smoking.
My old granny, she was a snuff dipper.
My father collected snuff boxes, and I was
Okay.
just polishing them today, actually, this morning.
There
And
you
some of them were very ornate and very beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think people took it also kind of to kind of give them a lift.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, it has an effect on the mood. My grandmother would sit in her lazy boy easy chair at night, and she would, she had her snuff thing, and she had her snuff stick and all that, and she'd come put some, up in her lip, and then after a while, you have to spit it out. And she had an old coffee can next to her, and she'd pick up the coffee, put it in there.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Really helped build me close to the ground.
Like chewing tobacco.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little more sophisticated than that.
Yeah. Dip.
Yeah.
Well, a snuff box was very small. And some of them had like a place where you put the snuff and then almost like a lid over it that had holes in it.
Right. Yeah.
So, and you would inhale it, hold it up to your nose and inhale it.
So either Father Flynn was partial to the High Toast brand, or that was all that his aunt could afford to give him every now and then. We don't know.
There you go. I'm sure there was a wide variety of grades of snuff.
I wonder, are there any boxes of snuff left in Sweeney's?
Well,
I bet you there are.
yeah.
I would be willing to bet you can still find snuff on the market somewhere.
Yes, you
Oh,
can.
you can, yeah.
You can.
A traditional tobacconist would have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are fewer and fewer between in the States anyway. They're harder to find.
There were two snuff boxes there, Donna, on the first cabinet on the way in, beside the
On
advertisement.
the right hand side.
Yeah, there used to be two snuff boxes there. Now this is a decade ago, you know. So
Okay.
God knows where they've gone. But
They
they
were probably sent over to Joan for her collection. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the ones I have are very small.
Yeah.
The women would carry them in their purse.
Oh yeah, they're tiny. Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
They were. Oh, I've nothing small enough to hold up, and they were very, very nice. But gosh, they might have been from the 1940s. I don't know. But and there was a little thing about, there was a little advertisement for snuff there, typed advertisement with it as well. But I can't remember it.
Remember that one. Just remember the ad for pink pills for pale people, which
Yes. Pills for pale people. That's a good one.
Yeah. Like that.
I liked that advertisement for the ship. I must go in and have a look and see.
That was the first example of quackery, apparently. So the first kind of real marketing of this fake product, which really was just iron tablets, you know. But didn't Gertie take some sort of jelloids or something, which are the same sort of thing, and her complexion is put down to these jello. And then what? Of course, Stephen's uncle, isn't that right? Doesn't he take tablets for the back pain or something, and Bloom?
Yeah, liver pills. Yeah. We used to have.
Oh yes,
Carter's little liver pills.
Carter's little liver pills. Yeah.
And Bloom questions the amount of money that the profit on them, and that he might as well. What was the quote? I can't remember now. You'll help me out.
Oh, got it.
He might as well be taking whatever. I don't know. For all the good that it's doing them, you know. But I can't rember now the quote.
I'll have to find that now. I won't go to bed till I find that. That's.
So there's a song. You have to Google the song "Pink Pills for Pink." Pink Pills for People. There was actually a song about them.
Yeah.
That's good.
You wouldn't know what's in Sweeney's. I'd love to actually, go through everything and kind of have an inventory of.
It should be cataloged. All of it. Everything should be cataloged.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, somebody's doing a wonderful job. I can't remember the man's name now, but I did meet him out in the tower. So if you go on to the Joyce Tower website and you can click on all the different items that they have, it's a wonderful resource that they have now. So I'd love to. Get
a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff went into that House of the Dead at the very start.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was, and there when it was taken over as a Joyce place, as opposed to the pharmacy, there were a lot of items still in.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. There's still prescriptions waiting to be picked up for the people who never picked up their prescription.
Yeah, I'm actually quite concerned about those because people come in and handle them and they are going to disintegrate. I mean, they're so fragile, and I don't know what anybody's thoughts are here, but I would think that maybe if we had them kind of nicely laid out and maybe with the perspex.
They should be under glass,
glass or whatever to protect them, because they're not going to survive, So
I remember a fella throwing one of those one day across to his friend, just throwing it,
Like, hey, look at this. Whoop.
Yeah, hey, look.
Yeah.
The public.
Going back to your pink pills, it's Dr. Williams' pink pills for pale people. It was used by the Dr. Williams Medicine Company and claimed to cure chorea, whatever that is. Chorea.
It's a shakes, I think.
Is it?
Yeah. Well, that's what I think. That's what Woody Guthrie had. He had Huntington's chorea.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would be any kind of shaking.
Palsy.
Palsy, Parkinson's,
Chorea, spasmodic nervous disease, St. Vitus stance.
Yeah. Locomotor ataxia, partial paralyxia, sciatica, neuralgia, rheumatism, nervous headache, and the after
A
effects
lot
of
of venereal
Langury.
diseases.
Nervous headache. Love it.
Like the old saying, cures coughs, colds, scabby holes, and pimples on the belly.
Go.
It's a panacea.
Yeah.
There was a girl sitting in front of me at our symphony hall last night, and I think, in thinking about it now that we bring it up, I think that's what she had. She could not stop moving. And the longer she had to be in her seat, the worse it got. I mean, she, constantly poking at something, scratching or
Yeah.
There's actually a wide variety of
yeah.
psychiatric drugs that cause that condition.
And do that.
Ataxia?
Yeah.
Wasn't the music? Perhaps it was the music.
It was today is Martin Luther King Day.
Oh,
And every year our symphony orchestra cooperates with I don't know if they have a committee or what, to put on a performance to honor Martin Luther King. And they have a chorus of people from different churches and music by either by Black composers or composers who wrote music to portray something in the life of Black people. It's very exciting.
Oh, good. So
to go to.
Good. I want to ask Lois. Lois, you said this is your first time to read anything from Dubliners?
Other than the Dead.
Other than the Dead, of course. You read last. Okay. Yeah, there are a number of people who their whole Joyce career is nothing but the Dubliners.
Yeah.
No, and as I think we've amply demonstrated, there's a lot of richness. Just in the story.
The other thing is I am not usually a short story reader. I generally don't like short stories. So that's factoring into this as well.
Yeah.
I think Joyce is almost, he's at the top of my list of short story writers.
Yeah.
If he'd only written this book, if he'd only published Dubliners, we would still be reading it and we would still be talking about Joyce, I think.
They're linked short stories. You could say this is a book about Dublin.
Yeah.
These are little chapters.
Yeah.
Short chapters, admittedly.
I think
You feel it's a book.
Michiko, who joined us several times, is here in Austin, Texas, to go to the Ransom Research Center as often as possible for 6 months to do some scholarly work on the Dubliners.
Oh.
So.
I think it's interesting that Joyce never wrote another short story, just stopped there and that was it. Yeah.
Well, we did not get to the second story.
I didn't think we would. I was going to say something because there's enough to talk about in every one of them that we probably will only read one a week.
Okay, well, I will assume that next week we will move to the encounter.
Encounter. Yeah.
Excellent.
Encounter.
An encounter.
And encounter.
Yeah.
Not the encounter.
An encounter.
I think the encounter would involve Nora Barnacle, but this is an encounter.
Excellent.
Very good. I love the Dubliners.
So perhaps we should wrap it up for today. And
this was a good choice, a very good choice, Duncan, to read the Dubliners. I'm very happy I'm reading it.
Thank you very much.
Me too.
It's amazing. almost every time we get started on reading anything from Joyce, at least in me, it makes a very strong desire to read the next one.
Yeah.
Duncan, have you a word, time that I could have a brief word with you about another matter
Sure. How
when we're
about,
finished?
okay.
Okay.
You
All
know
right.
what?
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
to see
Bye,
you all.
everybody.
Duncan.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next
Thank
week.
you all.
All right, yeah, you have to let yourself out so Joe and I can.
Well, it's nothing secret.
No, I know it's
Right.
nothing secret.
But how are you about? Are you looking for someone to join the Ulysses, or are you full up and
No,
motoring?
there's room for more people for sure.
I tell you what I have. I have a situation. I do a lot in my local library, and among the
Mhm.
things we have is an online Ulysses,
Mhm.
which runs for people in the library, really, because they need to come into us once in a while, and that is. But at the moment, I've just started a Ulysses, and we're full. And I've
Okay.
19 people on a waiting list, most of
Oh,
which
wow.
I really don't want to know about. But another one has come in who has taken the trouble to write to me by
Mhm.
email, but to find me.
Mhm.
And he wants to join to read Ulysses, and he's in California.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, could I refer him to you, give him your
Sure.
email address? I know nothing about him except that if I had room, I'd ask him to join mine.
Right.
But
Right.
again, he won't know anyone. He won't ever meet anyone. It's a different type of thing. But I've never spoken, obviously, to him. And but he has taken the trouble to reply to my reply, thanking me
Okay.
and saying, perhaps in 2025, there might be room this time next year, because I just do it once in the year and stop.
Right.
So could I do that, or do you want to think about it? I just don't
No.
know.
I don't even have to think about it. I keep
Yeah.
I keep control of the Zooms, and if somebody came in that I did not think was appropriate,
Yeah.
it's only happened in 4 years. It's only happened like twice.
Yeah.
And I just
You've got to run a tight ship. I'm like that too. You just need one person, and they will sour the whole group.
we had
And and you just have to watch for that and hit it hard and hit it early. And
Yeah.
that's why we have a delete button, on our
Yeah.
computers.
Yes. Well, we had one guy who stopped taking his medicine.
Oh yeah.
Just went bonkers, and we just said, you know what, it's not gonna work, and that was that. Yeah, just send him along, and I'll tell him that actually he has two choices since he's in California. I mean, we also do
Yeah.
a once a month, maybe twice a month thing in the early evenings. That's another Ulysses reading, or he can join us weekly
Yeah.
on Thursday.
Yeah, well, I'll give him. Will I give him? Let me give him your email and let him contact you, or I can do it the other way around. Give you his.
Or you can just give him the login information.
I'll just give it, and I'll copy you with the email I send him, and that would do it. Now, I just stress I know nothing about him. He could be a guy. He could be a local school shooter doing 95 years in jail or something. I've no idea. I've no idea. So you have to suss him out. But I admire a guy that, kind of just doesn't go on the wait list, and he says, is there any possibility I could do this or that? And then he still thanks me for refusing him, So I think he's probably okay. I'll do that. That's great.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks for this evening. Great reading.
Oh, it was fun. I'm looking already.